After lingering one more time outside the guest room, Han Doyoung finally turned and walked back into the living room, where his mother, Han Sukja, sat quietly, sipping tea from a porcelain cup. Across from her, Junwan sat near the window, arms folded, gaze distant. Doyoung strolled in casually, the polished click of his shoes echoing softly against the marble floor. A thin, sly smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "So," he began, eyes sweeping the room before settling on Junwan's face. "Why doesn't my dear nephew talk? Some kind of trauma?" Junwan looked up at him, but said nothing. Unfazed, Doyoung turned toward Han Sukja. "Mother? Surely you've got some wisdom about this. Why can't your grandson speak? It's been what, 2 years?" Han Sukja lowered her cup slowly, placing it back on the saucer with quiet precision. Her expression remained calm, almost gentle, but her eyes had lost all warmth. "Why didn't you come to your sister's funeral?" she asked softly. Doyoung blinked, caught off guard for just a moment. Then he scoffed, the smile on his face curdling. "I told you, I was abroad. Business ran over. Money doesn't sleep, mother." Han Sukja turned to face him fully. A brother who doesn't bury his sister cannot ask questions about her child. Doyoung let out a dry chuckle. "Well, excuse me for not flying across the globe to mourn a woman who hadn't spoken to me in years. I suppose you'll say I should have brought flowers and wept in front of her ashes to make things right." Han Sukja stood, placing her teacup down with a soft clink. Her voice remained low, but her gaze sharpened like a blade. "So why bother claiming her shares in her husband's company then, when you couldn't even come to her funeral?" Doyoung's jaw tightened. "I don't have to take this from you." "No," she said coolly, as she reached for her purse. "You don't. And Sangwoo doesn't have to take your presents either." Junwan rose quietly from his seat, silent throughout but attentive. His eyes stayed on Doyoung. The silence that followed was thick and unforgiving. Han Sukja turned to her son. "Let's go, Doyoung." For once, Doyoung didn't argue. He followed her out of the room, the weight of her words pressing against his back like a cold wind. The butler opened the door without a word, and soon, the two descended the steps and disappeared into their waiting car. Junwan remained by the window, watching them drive away. His face was unreadable, but his thoughts churned beneath the surface. In the guest room, Rose sat beside Sangwoo, who had finally begun to calm. His breathing had steadied, but his eyes remained fixed on the door, haunted, as if expecting the man he saw in the hallway to return. She reached for his hand gently. "Sangwoo," she whispered. "What did you see?" He didn't speak. His silence felt heavier this time, not the silence of confusion or fear, but of retreat. A wall had gone up again, taller than before. Rose exhaled quietly, her thumb brushing against his fingers. She didn't understand everything yet, but deep in her gut she felt it. After a few minutes of watching the driveway through the window, Junwan finally turned away, his expression unreadable. Quietly, he made his way down the hallway toward the guest room. The door was ajar. He pushed it open gently. Inside, Rose sat beside Sangwoo, who was curled up near the bed, knees drawn to his chest, his face blank, and his body still. The room was quiet, heavy with something unsaid. Junwan stepped in, his voice low, edged with concern. "What happened to him?" Rose looked up, her eyes tired but steady. He saw something that frightened him, deeply. But he hasn't written it down yet. Junwan's brows drew together. His eyes went to his son, then flicked toward the window, as though retracing the moments that had passed since the visitors left. He looked back at Sangwoo and asked cautiously, "Was it Doyoung?" But Sangwoo gave no response. His breathing was calmer now, but his gaze remained far away, as if still trapped in the memory. Junwan lowered himself onto the edge of the bed. "Sangwoo," he said gently, "if it's him, you can tell me. You're safe here." Still nothing. Rose tried next, her voice soft as a feather. "Would you like to write it down for us?" "Anything at all, sweetheart." But Sangwoo only stared ahead, unmoving. The wall around him had returned, thick, silent, and impossible to climb. The three of them sat in that silence for a long while. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the light streaming through the curtains began to change color, that Sangwoo finally stirred. He reached out slightly, not for a pen, not for paper, but for Rose's hand. She smiled, holding it gently. "I was thinking we could take a little walk to the market," she offered, trying to sound bright. "Just the two of us. What do you think?" Sangwoo shook his head slowly. "Okay," she nodded, understanding. "What about the crochet shop?" There was a pause. Then, for the first time in hours, Sangwoo gave a small, hesitant nod. Rose squeezed his hand, her voice light. "All right then. Let's get your shoes." Junwan watched from his seat, silent again, but this time his eyes held something like gratitude, or maybe relief. As Rose helped Sangwoo to his feet, Junwan rose too, quietly stepping out of the room to give them space. But in his heart, a storm was forming. If it was Doyoung, he would find out, and he wouldn't let it go. Inside the familiar warmth of the crochet shop, The colors and soft textures seemed to wrap around Sangwoo like a quiet hug. The usual buzz of customers and chatter felt distant to him today. He didn't rush to the counter like he normally did, didn't flash his notepad, or try to guess anyone's favorite color. Instead, he quietly made his way to a corner seat and just sat, still and silent, staring ahead. Rose handled the customers with her usual calm presence, but in between every smile and every wrapped parcel, her eyes kept drifting back to him. She could feel the heaviness in the air around him, like he was carrying something too big for someone so small. When the last customer left, she sat down and pulled out her project bag. The blue and white cardigan she'd been working on wasn't there. It was at home now. So she started something new, her hands moving on instinct. For a while, Sangwoo didn't move. Then quietly he stood, walked to a shelf, and selected a crochet hook and a ball of brown yarn. He sat on the small chair near the window and began to crochet. His fingers were slow at first, uncertain, like someone relearning a forgotten language. But then his hands found their rhythm. It was a blanket he was making. Rose paused and watched him from across the room, something warm and heavy rising in her chest. She didn't speak, only whispered softly to herself, "He's fighting something in him, and this is good." She returned to her own project with a quiet smile. The shop remained peaceful. When customers came in, they instinctively kept their voices low, as if they too sensed the weight of the moment. And through it all, Sangwoo crocheted without a word, just rows and rows of brown thread, woven into silence. That evening, back at the mansion, Rose tucked Sangwoo into bed. He lay still under the blanket, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She crouched beside him, brushing a hand lightly over his forehead. "I don't know what you saw, Sangwoo," she said softly, "but I do know this, you're strong. You're so strong. Keep going, okay? Make the people you love proud." Sangwoo turned his head toward her. His gaze held hers for a few seconds, and then slowly he nodded. A quiet understanding passed between them, unspoken but deep. Then he closed his eyes. Rose stood, switched off the light, and left the room with a quiet prayer on her lips. That same night, as the city lights flickered across the skyline, Han Doyoung's phone buzzed sharply on the table beside him. He picked it up with a swipe, not bothering to check the caller ID. "It's confirmed," came the voice on the other end, cold, clipped, efficient. Doyoung straightened in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Talk." "Your nephew," the voice said, "was found unconscious at the gate of his mother's close friend the night of her murder." Doyoung's jaw tensed, though his voice remained calm. "And," a pause, then the voice added carefully, "I consulted a therapist, off the record. He said a trauma that deep doesn't come from something imagined. That kind of fear? It's not random." There was a beat of silence. "He must have seen something that night. Something horrifying. Something you did." The words landed like steel against concrete. Doyoung's hand clenched around the phone, knuckles whitening. But before he could respond, the line went dead. He sat there in the dim glow of his penthouse, phone still pressed to his ear, the weight of those words tightening around him like a noose. Then slowly, he lowered the phone and walked to the window. The glass reflected his smirk, tight, cold, and bitter. "So," he murmured to himself, voice like a whisper wrapped in venom, "you saw me that night, little nephew." His eyes darkened as he stared into the city below. "Looks like you're more trouble than your mother ever was." Meanwhile, after Rose had tucked Sangwoo into bed, she padded quietly down to the kitchen for a glass of water. The mansion was silent at that hour, save for the soft hum of distant night insects drifting in through the slightly open windows. She sipped slowly, her thoughts still on Sangwoo's eyes, how haunted they had looked when he curled up in silence. On her way back to the guest room, she paused at the entrance to the living room. There, under the soft, golden light of the chandelier, Junwan sat alone on the couch, a half-full glass of wine resting in his hand. His tie was loosened, and his expression was unreadable, etched with a quiet storm of exhaustion and heaviness. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. Junwan looked up. His gaze met hers, shadowed but steady. "Just thinking," he replied, his voice low and a little rough. She moved closer, quietly taking the armchair across from him. "Can I help?" He let out a slow breath, his eyes turning to the glass, then away again. "My gut tells me that my son's trauma is tied to my brother-in-law," he said quietly. The way Sangwoo reacted today, it wasn't just fear. It was terror. That kind of reaction, it's not something a child fakes. Han Doyoung did something that scared my son deeply. Rose didn't speak at first. She only nodded solemnly, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the chair. Junwan leaned back, the wine forgotten on the table. "I've always had this feeling that my wife's death wasn't as simple as the reports claimed, that something wasn't right." He rubbed his temple, his voice growing heavier. "I had an investigator look into it after the funeral. I suspected it was Doyoung who killed her, but he wasn't even in the country when she was found dead. He was in Singapore attending a business summit. Pictures, timestamps, travel records, everything checked out. Rose frowned slightly. But records can be faked, she said softly. Junwan looked at her, sharp, almost startled, and then nodded slowly. Exactly, but I didn't have anything concrete. And at that time, I was broken. I was just trying to stay alive for Sangwoo. He glanced down the hallway, toward his son's room. Silence hung for a beat. You think Sangwoo saw Doyoung that night? Rose asked. I think, he exhaled deeply. I think he saw the truth, and his mind blocked it out to survive. But now, seeing Doyoung again, it's digging that memory back up. That fear, that trauma, it's coming back. Rose felt her chest tighten. She remembered Sangwoo's trembling hand, the way he clung to her shirt like the world would end. I don't want to push him, Junwan said again, his voice barely above a whisper. But I can't sit still either. If Doyoung had anything to do with my wife's death, Sangwoo is the only one who holds the truth. Rose looked at him gently. Then we help him remember. On his terms. Slowly, safely. Junwan nodded. His expression didn't soften, but something in his eyes shifted, quiet resolve breaking through the weight. Thank you, he said at last, for being here. She smiled softly. Sangwoo deserves peace. And so do you. The room went quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. They sat like that for a few more moments, two people bound by pain, and slowly by purpose. Eventually Rose stood. I'll get some rest now, she said gently. Junwan nodded. Good night. As she turned and walked back down the hallway to the guest room, the air behind her felt heavier, thick with buried secrets and the slow shifting of truth coming to light. 1 week passed, and Sangwoo's recovery picked up again, faster than anyone had anticipated. In the therapy room, he no longer waited for Rose's instructions. The moment he walked in, he gravitated toward an activity, choosing what to do before she even spoke. There was an urgency in him now, like something inside had cracked open, and the light was starting to push through. But what stood out most was his determination to speak again. Rose saw it in the way his mouth would twitch when she asked him questions, in the way he clenched his small fists during the heavy silences, and especially in his eyes, those deep, expressive eyes that silently screamed for release. Then one night it happened. Rose had been dozing lightly on the small couch in Sangwoo's bedroom. It had been a quiet evening, and she'd stayed longer than usual after tucking him in, just to make sure he was okay. She was drifting between sleep and wakefulness when she heard a sound, a soft murmur that pulled her fully upright. She turned toward the bed. Sangwoo was tossing gently under the covers, his face tense, scrunched as if caught in a bad dream. A few faint whimpers escaped his lips. Then came the word, soft, broken, barely audible. Sorry, mother. Rose's breath caught in her throat. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she rushed to his bedside. Sangwoo, she whispered, kneeling beside him. Say that again. Sangwoo. But his eyes remained shut. His breathing was still heavy, and then a single tear slipped down his cheek. Rose didn't hesitate. She picked up her phone and quickly dialed Junwan. He had called earlier to say he'd be home late due to an executive meeting, but the moment he answered, her voice trembled with urgency. He spoke, she said. In his sleep, he said, sorry, mother. And he's crying. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Junwan spoke. I'll be right there. 15 minutes later, he stepped into the room, still in his suit, the tie loosened, his face pale with concern. Though Sangwoo didn't speak again that night, Junwan and Rose sat by his side, watching him breathe. Neither of them said much, just listened, hoping for another word, another tear. His chest rose and fell steadily now, but his face remained damp, his small fists curled slightly against the blanket. The pain inside him was surfacing, even if slowly. The next day, as always, they went to the crochet shop. But something had changed. Sangwoo wasn't just there to pass the time. He was there with purpose. He moved to his usual corner with the soft brown yarn he'd chosen a week ago. His hands worked slowly at first, then faster, threading in deep blues, muted reds, and pale grays. Each loop, each stitch was layered with thought. He barely noticed the customers that came and went. Even when Rose tried to get his attention, he responded only with a slight nod, never pausing, never looking up. His focus was unshakable. That evening, as Rose was closing up the shop, she finally looked over his shoulder, and her breath caught. There, woven into the growing blanket, was a hallway. Long and shadowed, rendered in dark, heavy yarn. And in the center of that hallway was a figure. A woman. Lying motionless. Her eyes open. A crimson pool beneath her. It wasn't just a blanket anymore. It was a memory. Rose's hand trembled as she crouched beside him. Sangwoo, she said softly. Is that your mommy? He didn't respond. His crochet hook didn't stop moving. But as the yarn slipped through his fingers, a single tear dropped onto the fabric. Rose didn't say another word. She only placed a gentle hand on his back, anchoring him in the silence. He was remembering, but not with words, but with yarn, color, and the ache of memory. That night, after Sangwoo had drifted off to sleep, Rose carefully folded the half-finished blanket and brought it into the living room. Junwon looked up from his chair as she approached, his brows furrowing. "He's been working on this nonstop," Rose said softly, unfolding it on the coffee table between them. Junwon leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the stitching. The hallway. The figure on the ground. His breath caught. "That's our old house hallway," he murmured. "That's exactly where her body was found." Rose nodded slowly. "He's remembering, Junwon. He can't say it yet, but his hands are telling the story." Junwon stared at the blanket, his jaw tightening as something dark flickered behind his eyes. "I knew it," he whispered. "Doyoung was there that night. My gut is telling me he killed my wife." Silence settled over them, tense and thick. Then, with a slow breath, he pulled out his phone. His voice, when he spoke, was low and cold. "Keep following Han Doyoung wherever he goes," he said. "I don't care how clean he looks. Do not stop. Watch everything. Report everything." He ended the call and set the phone down beside him. Across from him, Rose sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. The truth was no longer buried. It was slowly unraveling. And if it really was Han Doyoung who killed Junwon's wife, then only one terrifying question remained. Why?